I spent the last few years of my career in the healthcare system in Canada, managing project management teams in the cancer control system. And one of the things that you quickly learned in the healthcare system is that it wasn't the doctors who made the system run. It wasn't the doctors who made it work and held everything together. It was the nurses. The nurses are the heroes of the healthcare system most of the time. And the majority of them are women. They hold everything together. They nurture the patients. They are the glue that manage to keep all of the disparate, all of the warring parts of these complex systems held together for the sake of the patients. Our sisters and our ecclesias do the same thing. And when we, as brethren, are engaged in the controversial issues that we often have to be engaged in, when we're engaged in managing the trouble, the conflicts, the issues, sometimes effectively, sometimes ineffectively, oftentimes it's our sisters that hold everything together behind the scenes, that make it so that families are cared for and not forgotten, that ensure that the elderly, the infirm, the young in the truth, feel a part of and are able to feel loved and cared for. This week we're going to be looking at a few sisters. Now, my greatest limitation is that I am a man, which means I'm going to, the best of my ability, try to imagine my way into a sister's heart. Sometimes it will be folly to even attempt to do it. And other times we might get at least a sense of what our sisters might be thinking in these passages. And I'd be happy to get any feedback, especially from sisters, with respect to their thoughts, their ideas, their perceptions of what could be going on in the circumstances that we look at. We begin with Sarah. And we begin with Sarah in Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11, verse 30. And this is our introduction to Sarai. Her name has not yet been changed. But Sarai was barren. She had no child. Now the writer could have stopped at Sarah was barren, and we would have gotten the point. But he writes, Sarai was barren. She had no child. It is as if this is the central fact of her reality. It's the source of her pain, of how she has been treated, of how she is viewed by the society in which she lives. In this day, a woman's worth in the eyes of the society, not necessarily in the eyes of her husband. Her worth was tied to the children that she had, particularly sons. And for a woman to be barren, for a woman to have no child, would have been a great trial for her to bear. A great trial indeed. Now, some of the men who have written dictionaries, lexicons, analytical commentaries, say that the name Sarai means my princess. But there's another body of thinking that says that the name Sarai means she that strives, she that contends. And an interesting element to the story of Sarai is going to be that both of these possible interpretations for this name are evident in the life that she leads, that is described for us in Genesis. Chapter 12 begins with the great Lech Lecha in Hebrew. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house. And some Hebrew commentators refer to that phrase at the beginning, get thee out. And they say that it could be interpreted to mean, leave for your own good. Leave for your own good. So Abram, a man who has been spoken to by God, leaves Ur of the Chaldees, or leaves the country that he has come to, after his father has departed from Ur of the Chaldees, and goes to a place he's not sure is going to be the destination. He's not sure where he's going, but he knows he has to leave. And Sarai leaves with him. Sarai shares his vision. She shares his belief. She shares his profound trust for the God who has spoken to him. Leave your kindred and your father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and bless thee, make thy name great. Thou shalt be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. And so they depart. And they leave to go into a land that God will show them. And you would think that God, after taking them out of their area that they'd grown up in, and then taking them out of the country that they had moved to after they moved out of Ur of the Chaldees, that He would have made it somewhat easy for them. He might have given them a transition period where things would be bearable, comfortable, where they could ease in to this new life, the difficult life of a believer. But that's not what happens. They leave the land of Mesopotamia, rich, lush land, land that was good for flocks, good for sheep, good for cattle, good for grazing. And they come into the land, and it says, verse 10, there was a famine in the land. So the land that God has promised yields nothing but death. It's dust. It's dried out. It's turned into a dust bowl. And so from the very beginning of their story, this trial and difficulty, and the great clash between surviving in this world with all its difficulties, the life that is lived based on belief and trust in a God who will take care of us. There's famine in the land. And what are they faced with? The animals are dying around them. People are getting sick. They can stay in the wilderness and die in that wilderness, or go down into Egypt. Egypt, where animals are gods. Where Pharaoh, a licentious man, is worshipped as a god. And where the moral standard of the society was so low that people were at risk at all times who were traveling through as sojourners. Abram knew that even in Egypt there was a respect for marriage. But he also knew that there was nothing stopping the Egyptians from killing him for his beautiful wife, at this time, around 65 years of age. And so it says, it came to pass when he was come near to enter into Egypt, he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a beautiful woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife. And they will kill me, that they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, that thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and that my soul may live because of thee. If you were to put yourself in Sarai's shoes for a moment, and just reflect on what you might think, what you might say, if your husband asked you to do that. Would your husband, this man who has left everything behind, all the comforts of its libraries, the business district, the residential district, indoor plumbing, beautiful homes, the gardens of of the Chaldees. This man who's left everything behind, and you've come with him, is now terrified that the same God that has asked him to leave of the Chaldees will not take care of him in Egypt. And might it not be easy as a wife to say, what are you asking me to do? You're asking me to lie. But where's your faith? What happened to your belief? What about the God that we believe in, who asked us to leave? Isn't He going to take care of us? What kind of man are you? How can you be so weak in this moment? What kind of guidance and direction is that, Abram? Is that how you're leading me as my husband? But she doesn't say any of those things. Such as is her love for Abram. And her love, we should also conclude, of the truth and the things that she believed. That instead of rounding about and accusing her husband, instead of pointing out his frailty and his weakness, she's bigger and larger than that. In this day and age, this culture and this society, the idea that I have to be happy and that things have to be good for me and that things have got to be working in such a way that I feel okay is preeminent. That sense of entitlement is a powerful aspect of the society in which we live. The sense of duty, of obligation to other people, of obligation to something bigger than me, a community, my marriage, my child, the company I work for. But that, when there is a duel between obligation and entitlement, today in this world, entitlement and selfishness always wins. Sarah could have said, this woman Sarai, I am entitled to happiness. I'm entitled to better leadership than you are giving me. I'm entitled to feel safe. I'm entitled to expect that you will believe in God, that you will protect me. I'm entitled to all of those things. But instead, Sarai chose her obligation, her duty, to something bigger than what she was entitled to. She looked at her husband and the distress he was in. She thought through what he was asking her to do. She understood the gray zone of morality that he was asking her to step into. And she thought, if this does happen, if I am taken, then the promises will still have to be fulfilled. And maybe God will give Abram another wife, another woman, so that he can fulfill his promise to him. And Sarai chose to sacrifice herself She chose to do that so that she could save Abram, believing that God would still find a way to fulfill His promises. And believing perhaps more than Abram that God would somehow take care of her and carry her through. Now that's a very brave and a very courageous and a very wonderful sister. And this is a picture of a real man and a real woman. Not the romantic nonsense we'd like to keep in our heads, the storybook people that we sometimes turn people in the Bible into. This is about a real man, a real woman. It says, came to pass, verse 14, when Abram was coming to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her, commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Now, just imagine that. Sarai is taken away from Abram, the man who adores her, into the house of the licentious, immoral king of Egypt. And what would have happened when Sarai was taken into the house of Pharaoh? Well, doubtless she would have been surrounded by servants, cleaning her up, changing her appearance, washing her, treating her body from head to toe with ointments, putting on the makeup of the Egyptians, the cosmetics, giving her perhaps even a wig, as was worn commonly by the upper class women of Egypt, changing the clothing that she wore so that it was the clothing of Egyptian women of the aristocracy, putting on the jewelry, doing her nails. It would have changed the way she looked completely, and Sarai, looking in the mirror, would not have felt pleasure, but would have felt sorrow, would not recognize herself, and would know in her heart that my husband wouldn't recognize me either. Would be in that house waiting for the inevitable and hoping that somehow God would take care of her. It says, moving on, he entreated Abram well for her sake. Now you see those little words back in verse 30 where he says, that it may be well with me? It's the same phrase, same term. So he asked her to lie, to save him, that it would be well with him. And Pharaoh makes it well with him. Makes it well with him. By pouring out largesse, giving all kinds of luxurious things to him. And so it says, he had sheep, oxen, he-asses, men servants, maid servants, she-asses, and camels. So all of the wealth of Egypt is pouring into Abram for his wife. And every new gift drove him deeper into that lie and put her life more at risk, put her honor at risk. Every face of every servant that walked into Abram's encampment reminded him of the face he was grieving for, the face that he yearned to see. Every sound made by and every little face of an animal that walked by in these flocks reminded him of the sacrifice that his wonderful wife had made for him. Now, if you were to put yourself in that position as a man, imagine how you would feel.
There are so many times in the lives of men and women where we feel completely bereft of any ability, derelict in our duties, empty, clueless, ignorant, bad leaders, poor examples. And I reckon that is what our brother Abram felt at that time, as he looked at the situation that his wife was in because of him. It says the house of Pharaoh was smitten with disease. And as they fell, every man, woman, and child throughout the palace, except for Sarah. Sarai would have been called in and interrogated. Who are you? Where are you from? What exactly is your relationship to this man? Why is everybody sick? And you're not sick? And there is no doubt that Sarai told Pharaoh, sick Pharaoh, depleted and diminished Pharaoh, the truth. Now, under most circumstances, Pharaoh would have executed Sarai, Abram, and everybody that was with them. But there was terror that was in the hearts of everyone in the palace of Egypt because of what God had been doing. And there is no doubt that Sarai would also have said, this is happening in the palace because of our God. And when Pharaoh calls Abram, this is what happens. He says to him, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so I might have taken her to be my wife? Now therefore, behold your wife. Take her and get out of here. Now, I don't know about you, brother, but if that was me, I think Sarai would have to take me in a little paper bag out of that room. Because this is a man who has lost his integrity completely. Who is in front of the man, the most powerful man on the face of the earth in that general region, and he has lied to him. And he's involved his wife in the lie. And God has acted. Sarai chose obligation over entitlement. So did God. God could have said, I'm entitled to belief and trust from the people that I call. I'm entitled to that. He doesn't even trust me. This man that I've spoken to directly doesn't trust me. This man who would eventually be called the friend of God. And I'm just going to leave him to deal with his situation. I'm leaving him in the lurch. Let him learn a good lesson. But that's not what he does. God is bigger than that. God doesn't act with entitlement. God acted with a sense of obligation and duty. Duty to these two frail, weak, mortal, human, flesh and blood people. And in loving kindness, he saves Sarai and he saves Abram. Now, brothers and sisters, when you think about what Abram saw in front of him, when Pharaoh said, there's your wife, take her and get out. The woman that he saw didn't look like Sarai. But because of him, had upon her the marks, the form the fashion, the image of the world. What he saw in front of him was a beautiful Egyptian woman. And what did she see? A man who was like a husk of himself, with hollows under his eyes because he was weeping for his own unbelief and what had happened to his wife and what he could only imagine could be happening. A man who had lost so much of his sense of strength, the ability to lead, to guide. And so two people look at each other and don't recognize each other. But in fact, recognize aspects of each other they had not realized. Sarai would have seen how much he loved her, how much he cared, how much he had wounded himself through this situation, and the great grief that had taken him and dried him out. And she would have seen his frailty. She would have seen his faults and understood them when she made the decision to choose obligation over entitlement. She knew the man in her life. She knew his limitations as well as his good character. And he saw the woman that was prepared to do even this to save him, to put up with these things, to allow herself to be transformed into what the Egyptians made her look like so that he would be safe. And they would both understand the God that they believed in. The God that loved them so much that he modeled for them obligation over entitlement, love, and forgiveness. In any marriage that lasts a long time, bad things are bound to happen. How we conduct ourselves when those bad things happen show us our true character. Put our character to the test. And in this situation, this man and this woman come back together again. They're wiser. They're stronger in their belief. But there's a scar tissue, when these things happen. There's something that stays there, a memory, a hurt. We push past these things, we overcome them, and we forgive. But there's that memory of what has happened and the mistakes that we have made. And as the relationship moves forward, Abram demonstrates a degree of deference to Sarah that almost shows as if he's not willing to push too far. He's not willing to move in a direction that could cause her to be hurt or upset because of what he had done in this situation. And so, brothers and sisters, we move further into another story. We move into Genesis chapter 16. Sarai and Abram had been told, or Abram had been told, and Sarai knew that he was going to be the father of a multitude. Verse 6 of chapter 15 says, he believed in the Lord. He counted it to him for righteousness. But he showed him the stars and told him, your children are going to be like this. And now this man who had doubted God in the matter of Egypt believes, and God accounts it to him for righteousness. And then years go by and nothing happens. And Sarah sees herself aging and aging. And it says, chapter 16 verse 1, Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children. And she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Sarai said unto Abram, behold now, the Lord hath restrained me, from bearing. So what we see in Sarai, apart from courage and grace and patience and tolerance of the weakness and the frailty of her husband and faith, is a pragmatic, common sense, down-to-earth attitude to life. She looks at the circumstance and she thinks practically, well, how could I ever have a child at this stage? But according to the law of the land, according to the code of Hammurabi, according to the social norms, if my servant has a child and my servant belongs to me, then that child is my child, or can be my child, if I choose for it to be so. And so she takes Hagar, young Egyptian Hagar. And remember, if you had left Egypt as an aristocratic woman, your servants would have been beautiful young servants. So here's this young Egyptian woman, a servant, part of the wealth given by Pharaoh to Abram and to Sarai. And she gives this girl to Abram. Now this young woman is a slave. She's used to being seen as a thing, property, chattel, at the beck and call of her masters, of her mistress. With all of the humiliation that goes with slavery, all of the lack of selfhood, of identity, of being an individual, of being your own person at your own beck and call. And when she now spends time with a godly, loving, sensitive, kind, considerate, warm-hearted, gentle, believing man, what's the effect going to be on her? Sarai, in all her calculations, had never calculated the impact that relationship could have on the heart of her young slave girl. She just looked at her as a vessel. Because that's how people looked at their servants. You might have a relationship with them, but ultimately, this was something that belonged to you. Property. And so all that Hagar was meant to be was a container. Now, after having a relationship, an interaction with a man like Abram, might not young Hagar have thought, I am not a container. I'm not a vessel. I'm a woman. I'm a young woman. I have feelings. This man feels something for me. I see it when I walk by him, and the color comes into his cheeks. And he smiles and he says good morning to me. And he treats me like a person, not like a thing. And I saw when he was with me that there was a feeling he had for me. I'm no different. I'm no lower than she is. Might Sarai not have walked by the tent where the women were working to overhear raucous laughter, Hagar's voice imitating her voice, Hagar talking about Abram, Hagar talking about, well, that's not the only child I'm going to give him. Might she not have been hurt to the core? Especially as a woman who might have shared her heart and her feelings sometimes, as her servant combed her hair and helped her. Hagar, her servant. And when Sarai perceives in Abram's face, with the sensitivity that a woman has, that he has a feeling for this girl, and that he does not just see her as a vessel, as a container, what would that have done to Sarai's heart? What would this have done to this gracious, courageous, loving woman's heart, who all her life had to deal with the fact something is wrong with me. I'm not like other women. I'm not as good as them. I can't have a child. I'm a half woman. She could have borne anything but that. When she reacts, the reaction is the shadowy part, the shade in her life. It says, verse 5, Sarai said to Abram, my wrong be upon thee. She explodes. He says to her, look, she's under your control. Do whatever you want to do with her. And she so mistreats this servant that she escapes off into the wilderness. She escapes off into the wilderness. They may have seen her at some point, Sarai particularly, as a vessel, a container for their child. But God didn't see Hagar that way. When Hagar is found in the wilderness, it's not Abraham that goes looking for her. It's the angel of the Lord. He finds her. And he treats her with love, compassion, and respect. And he sends her back home to submit to Sarai. When we look very, very briefly at the story of a woman who would come later, Rebecca. We remember Eleazar going and laying out this detailed, comprehensive prayer to the God of his master. I'd like the girl to do this and that, and this and that. And if she says this, and if she says that, if she does this and if she does that, then I'll take it that this is the one. And the prayer is all about a girl who is about strength of character and will and community. Community. Because he doesn't just want her to give him water and then go on her way. And the girl herself spontaneously offers to water all the camels. Now, you've seen camels in pictures. A camel drinks gallons and gallons and gallons of water. And these stone vessels, these stone water pots, are very heavy. And so this was a young woman going down to the water source, back up to the camels. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And then she takes them home. And Eleazar knows that's the kind of girl that Isaac needs. He needs a girl like that. But the story isn't a happy story. Because the story involves a lot of shade in it, a lot of dark times. With Abraham and Sarai, there would be other mistakes. It wouldn't just be the matter of Egypt. It wouldn't just be the matter of Hagar. Other things would happen. And yet they held together. They grew closer and closer. At the end, it's the end of a wonderful romance. With all the real-life problems that husbands and wives have. That isn't the case with Rebecca. When we go to Genesis chapter 27, what we see, in effect, in this home is two solitudes. Two solitudes. There's Rebecca on the one side and Isaac on the other side. There's my son and his son. My son and her son. Rebecca had been told when that great struggle, that battle, that war between unborn babies was going on inside of her, there are two kinds of people in you. Two ways of thinking by inference. Two attitudes to life. Two directions. Two ways. And Rebecca, all her life, would struggle with those things in her very mind and in her own heart. She was a strong-willed woman. She could be domineering and dominant. But she, like Sarai, had the courage to do what needed to be done when the man in her life was not leading. And so this matter involving the deception of blind Isaac, hard though it is to read, sad though it is to contemplate, is not something for which she is condemned, at least in the narrative of Genesis. She took matters into her own hands, it is true. But it's because Isaac was not leading. She did what she felt under the circumstance was the logical thing to do to ensure that the promises, the inheritance, the blessing, all these things would be secure as God had told her. The younger shall be served by the elder. She could see and hear that Isaac was cutting across the will of God to do the wrong thing. She stepped in to do what she did. Now, Sarai made a sacrifice. She sacrificed herself to save Abram. She sacrificed herself again to bring the Egyptian servant into their marriage. And Rebecca, in this home with two solitudes, if there was even a hint of a chance that there could be a reparation, a renewal of love in the marriage that she had with Isaac, and some kind of warmth and closeness that was like all the love that they had had at the beginning of their marriage, she sacrificed it all so that God's promises could be fulfilled the way He wanted them to be, and so that Jacob would play the role that he had to play. At the end of that story, the sadness and the sorrow that they feel when they look at Esau's wives, and the kind of family life they live, the brokenheartedness she feels, it's crushing. She would never see Jacob again after sending him away to some of the worst years of his life in order to save his life. She's a strong woman, a very strong woman, an overpowering woman sometimes. Look at the words that she actually uses in that story in connection with the deception of Isaac. She says to him, verse 9 of chapter 27, "Go now to the flock and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loveth. And thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death." And she says these words. They are strong words. Look what she said in verse 8. "Therefore, my son, obey my voice, according to that which I command thee." This is a strong woman, a firm woman, not a woman to be trifled with, a kind of force of nature. And there are sisters like that. There are sisters like that. One crosses them only after much consideration in advance. And yet this strong, powerful, this innovative woman, this woman who could think on the fly and move with decisive, clinical precision, would have her heart broken in pieces at the end. She would never see her son Jacob, never hold a grandchild in her arms, never kiss one of those little ones again. Never kiss one of those little ones again. Never kiss one of those little ones again.